Well, that wasn't that restaurant wasn't 100 yards from here, right where we're videotaping this interview.
It was across the road.
Right
there?
across the road.
That was my understanding. It was before my time, but a lot of famous players like Bobby Dorr and Pinky Higgins and Joe Cronin and Joe Vosmick. A lot of these ball players, they had come here and they knew and were familiar with them.
Well, I think the restaurant was known as Millie's or the Johnsons, when their last name were Johnson.
Yeah, Johnson.
And then it burnt down in 1968.
Wow.
Because my father was sick with cancer and he died in 68. And he was the one who told everybody there's a fire. And he apparently, through the reflection in the window or something, could see a fire, and there was a fire over there. So now we have a lot of material to cover, so I will just go ahead and shift over, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to say before we do that?
No, I think that's...
Okay, I'm going to just pause for a second here. So this is some of the material that Kent has brought, and the first pictures are... go ahead, Kent. This is...
All right. The picture, the top picture here is of Thomas Mann. And he was the first homesteader on Longboat Key. He proved up in 1891. And he was a native of Indiana, I believe Noble Township in Shelby, Indiana. And prior to the Civil War, he took his family and they went up to Minnesota in Stearns County.
And it was Thomas Mann?
Thomas Mann, yes.
Right.
And
the first official settler that we know of, a European. There were probably camps of Spanish back in the days when the Cuban fishermen came up here. They had ranchos, but this was the first settler at the north end of Longboat Key.
Yes. And you had to live on the property at least 5 years in order to qualify for a grant to the title of the property. Now, he claimed an area that, when the surveyors got finished, that comprised 144 acres, more or less. And it covered from the Gulf to the bay. So essentially, what became the Long Beach Village was on his homestead.
Now, this second one is a picture of his house.
Yes.
Now, would that be him sitting there?
Yes, that's Thomas Mann sitting there on the left, and that's a picture of the house. And of course, it is very reminiscent of the way the Indians made their little...
just using the materials that were at hand.
Yeah, basically the roof was made up of palm fronds, and they put them so thick that they were waterproof underneath. And Thomas Mann, as I started to say, took his family to Stearns County, Minnesota, which is in St. Cloud, I think, in Brainerd, that area, just northwest of the Twin Cities. And then the war came along, and Mann went into the service, and his wife remained with the children in Minnesota. And they had a rough time of it, and I have a letter that was written by Mrs. Thomas Mann's wife, pleading for him to answer her letters. And anyway, somebody asked me, why did they come down to Florida? You know, and I said, well, it's obvious you haven't spent a winter in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, that was the driving force. They wanted to go someplace where they didn't have to wear a lot of clothes, and it wasn't, and the weather was nicer, and so they came down.
All right, now give me a second to just shoot. Okay.
The sleepy older village at the north end of Longboat Key has a distinction of being the Key's oldest continuous settlement. Its origins date back more than 100 years to when Thomas W. Mann moved his family from the river community of Manatee for the abundant living at the north end of Longboat Key in 1885 to become the island's first homesteader. But even before the first white American settlement began there, Indian mounds bear evidence of a long-standing Indian presence, preceding the coming of the Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s, and later the arrival of the Cuban fishermen, who evidently established a seasonal fishing rancho and Indian trading post. Florida's barrier islands and coastal shoreline were important to the Cuban fishermen and coasting mariners as a base for fishing operations because of the ready source of drinking water from shallow wells or flowing artesian wells. The first tangible evidence of Spanish presence at the north end of Longboat Key was uncovered in 1941 by Gordon Whitney, founder of the Whitney Beach Resort in the mid-1930s, while building a driveway for his home on Bayou Hammock across Bishop's Bayou from Whitney Beach. Whitney unearthed 2 bushel baskets of mineralized wood and scraps of metal, later deemed to be the remains of a Spanish scout boat, presumably that of Jan Anesco, the Hernando de Soto's advanced scout, whose boat reportedly wrecked in this area the year before the Spanish conquistador made his historic landing at or near the mouth of the Manatee River in May of 1539. Carl Bickle, the former president of United Press Wires Service and author of the entertainingly authoritative book Mangrove Coast, believed that Hernando de Soto's advanced scout Juan Anesco and his crew were the first white men to explore the Sarasota and lower Tampa Bay area in 1538 and probably recommended the site for De Soto's landing the following year. Following the conclusion of the Second Seminole Indian War in 1842, the United States government continued to pursue its Indian removal policy while opening up most of Florida's peninsula previously reserved for the Indians for settlement under the Armed Occupation Act. American settlers soon began moving into the former Indian reservation south and central Florida, pushing those remaining further south into the Big Cypress Swamp and the Everglades. The movement of settlers south into what became the sprawling Manatee County followed 2 paths. One, by land down the Peace River Basin from Bartow to Fort Meade in Arcadia. And 2, by boat from Tampa and Cedar Keys down the lower Florida Gulf Coast and up the Manatee River and down Sarasota Bay through Boca Grande Pass into Charlotte Harbor and up the Peace River to Fort Ogden. Hoping to find his fortune and claim a homestead, Sarasota's first white American settler, 22-year-old William Whitaker, made his initial foray down the west coast of Florida with a party of Tallahassee land seekers about 1843. Journeying as far south as the north end of Longboat Key, they observed a palm shack there on the bay side and went ashore, encountering a lone inhabitant, a Spaniard making his living by fishing and selling his sun-cured products to the Cuban traders who occasionally stopped at his lonely abode. As it turned out, this was not just any ordinary fisherman. He was Jose Elazarri, a Spanish-born naturalized citizen of the United States who, as a member of the state's first militia, fought as a Florida Ranger in the Second Seminole Indian War. He also served as a territorial assemblyman from the Monroe County, which includes Key West, in 1841 to 42, and was a temporary customs appraiser at Key West in 1839, a position he later sought for the Tampa Bay area while fishing out of Longboat Key. Later, both Arzardi, I'll have to master that, and Whitaker would wind up filing claims for homesteads across Sarasota Bay in today's Sarasota at the conclusion of the Second Seminole Indian War in 1842. While Elizardi failed to prove up on his claim, Whitaker, joined by his half-brother Hamlin V. Schnell, earned title to 199 acres at Yellow Bluffs on what is now Whitaker Bayou, a quarter-mile north of today's Van Wezel Theater of Performing Arts. Whitaker became Sarasota's first white settler by living and farming on his claim. This was no easy task, as Whitaker would discover when on the evening of September 22, 1848, a severe hurricane roared in off the Gulf of Mexico, washing over Longboat, Lido, Siesta, Anna Maria, and Egmont Keys, and all barrier islands before slamming across the Florida mainland. In its wake, two passes were cut through barrier islands off the then giant Hillsborough County: Johns Pass at St. Petersburg Beach and New Pass in Longboat Key. Hunkering down that night in his log cabin on Yellow Bluffs, William Whitaker rode out the hurricane as the high waters, driving rain, and roaring wind gusts swept waves over Longboat Key and across Sarasota Bay, lashing the banks of Yellow Bluffs on Whitaker's Bayou and blowing down trees all around. Recalling the events of that harrowing night, pardon me, Whitaker told his children years later, "I didn't believe I would live through the night. The logs and the wall groaned as they were in agony. Every minute I thought they would be tumbling down on me." The next morning the hurricane had blown by, and as Whitaker emerged, he gazed out across Sarasota Bay toward the sandy beach on Longboat Key. But where he kept his fishing nets, all he saw was open water of a new channel to the open Gulf that had been cut through the island, severing the lower end of Longboat Key from Lido Key. Whitaker called the new storm-forged channel, quote, New Pass, a name that persists to this day.
So this is part of a book that this will be a chapter in a book that you're working on?
Well, it was. I never finished it, and unfortunately, I'm afraid that age is not in my favor.
All right, well, let's take a break for a second.